I never touched him. I never kissed him. I never crossed that kind of line. So why do I feel this guilty? It started inside my own home. In moments that looked harmless, I shared things I stopped sharing with my partner. I told myself it didn't matter, but my body knew it did. I'm a woman in my 30s, in a long-term relationship built around family routines, shared meals, and quiet nights at home. From the outside, nothing looked broken. I wasn't looking for problems. I wasn't unhappy enough to leave, and I wasn't searching for attention. I honestly believed I was just being supportive in a situation that felt familiar and safe. But I slowly began choosing someone else emotionally. Not instead of my partner at first, just before him. And by the time I noticed what that meant, the guilt was already there. Before I go on, tell me this in the comments. Do you think emotional loyalty matters as much as physical loyalty? And if you enjoy honest, uncomfortable Reddit-style stories about relationships, subscribe and share this with someone who would argue both sides. It didn't start with a secret conversation in a corner or a dramatic confession. It started in my living room. We were all there. My partner, his family, and him. Someone who had been around for years. Someone who already belonged to our routine in a way that felt normal and unquestioned. Dinners, holidays, casual visits, nothing that raised alarms. At some point that night, my partner went to the kitchen to help his mother, and I stayed behind on the couch. He sat down across from me and asked a simple question. "How are you really doing?" It caught me off guard. Not because it was intimate, but because it felt genuine in a way I hadn't felt in a while. I answered honestly without thinking too much. Just a short response about being tired, overwhelmed, trying to keep everything together. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix anything, just nodded. When my partner came back, the conversation shifted to something light, and that moment ended. Or so I thought. Later that night, when everyone left and the house was quiet, I replayed that small exchange in my head, not because it meant something romantic, but because it felt like relief, like being seen without having to explain myself. The next day, he messaged me. Nothing dramatic. Just, "I was thinking about what you said last night. Hope you're okay." I hesitated before replying. Not long. Just enough to notice the hesitation. I answered anyway. That was the first time I chose to respond to him before talking to my partner about how I was feeling. It didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt practical, easy. Over the next few days, it happened again. Short messages, check-ins, shared frustrations about family dynamics, expectations, stress, things that felt safer to say to someone who wasn't directly affected by them. I didn't hide it at first. I just didn't bring it up. At home, my partner asked how my day was. I gave him the surface version, the acceptable version. Meanwhile, I had already unpacked the heavy parts with someone else. One night, sitting on the couch next to my partner, I caught myself thinking, I should tell him this, and then immediately thought, I'll text him later. That thought scared me more than anything that had happened so far, because I realized I had started sorting my emotions, deciding who got what part of me, and my partner was no longer the first person in line. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself I wasn't touching anyone, flirting, or crossing any obvious line. But the guilt didn't come from what I was doing. It came from who I was choosing. What would you have done in my place? After that first message, I told myself I would keep things light. No deep conversations, no late replies, no sharing anything I wouldn't feel comfortable repeating out loud in my own home. That was the rule I set in my head. It didn't last. The messages didn't come every minute. That's what made them feel acceptable. A check-in here, a short comment there, something about a family situation, something about stress, always framed as casual, always easy to answer. What I didn't expect was how quickly my instincts shifted. Something stressful would happen during the day, and instead of thinking, I'll tell my partner tonight, my first thought became, I should message him. Not because my partner wouldn't listen, but because this felt simpler, less loaded, less likely to turn into a bigger conversation. At home, everything looked the same. We cooked together. We watched TV. We talked about schedules and plans. From the outside, Nothing was wrong. But inside, I felt slightly ahead of my partner emotionally, like I had already processed things with someone else before bringing them home. One evening, my partner asked, "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" I said yes, not automatically, thoughtfully, because part of me really believed it. Later that night, when my partner went to shower, I checked my phone and saw a message waiting. Did today get any easier? I felt that familiar relief, that soft landing feeling, and I hated myself a little for how much I noticed it. I answered, then put my phone face down on the table. Not because I was hiding it, just because I didn't want to be distracted. That was the excuse. But the truth was, I didn't want to split my attention between the person next to me and the person who already knew how my day actually felt. At a family dinner that weekend, I caught myself watching him across the table. Not with desire, with recognition, like we shared a quiet understanding no one else in the room could see. When he asked me something directly, something small, I answered too quickly, too naturally. My partner noticed. Later that night, my partner said, "You and him seem close lately." I laughed it off. "We've always been around each other. It's nothing." And again, that wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the full story. That night, lying in bed, I tried to pinpoint when this started feeling wrong. There was no clear moment, no obvious crossing, just a slow shift in priority. I hadn't chosen him instead of my partner. I had just chosen him first, and I didn't know how to undo that without admitting something I wasn't ready to name. Do you think I crossed a line without realizing it? The guilt didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as discomfort. I started noticing it in small moments, when something happened during the day, and I caught myself editing the version I told my partner. Not lying, just simplifying, leaving out the parts I had already shared with someone else. At first, I told myself I was protecting my relationship, avoiding unnecessary tension. Not every thought needs to be shared, right? But then I realized something unsettling. I wasn't deciding what to share. I was deciding with whom. There were things I didn't even consider bringing up with my partner anymore. Not because he wouldn't understand, but because I had already processed them elsewhere. The emotional work was already done. One evening, my partner tried to talk to me about something personal. Not a fight, just a feeling. I listened, nodded, responded, but I felt oddly disconnected, like I was arriving late to a conversation I should have been leading. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message from him, about the same topic, same issue, same tension. And I realized he was hearing my raw thoughts while my partner was getting the filtered version. That realization sat heavy in my chest. I tried to pull back after that. I told myself I would slow the replies, create space, redirect emotional conversations back where they belonged. But when he sensed the shift, he asked if I was okay, if he had done something wrong, if he had overstepped, and instead of setting a boundary, I reassured him, "No, you're fine. I've just been busy." I chose his comfort over my clarity. At a family gathering a few days later, my partner reached for my hand. I held it, but my attention drifted. I found myself wondering if he was watching, if he noticed the change too. That thought scared me, because it meant I was aware enough to feel guilty, but not brave enough to stop. That night, my partner asked, "Do you feel distant lately?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say I felt split in two, but I said, "I don't think so." The guilt sharpened then, not because I was doing something forbidden, but because I was choosing silence again. I went to bed knowing something inside our relationship was thinning out, stretching, losing its shape, and I still didn't know how to name what I was doing, only that if my partner ever saw it the way I did, it would hurt. A lot. Was I wrong for reassuring someone else when I should have been honest with myself? The first time my partner directly felt it was during a normal evening at home. We were sitting on the couch, nothing special on TV, just background noise filling the room. He was talking about his day, about something stressful at work, and I was listening. At least, I thought I was. My phone buzzed on the table. I didn't pick it up. I didn't even look at it. But my body reacted anyway. A small tension in my shoulders, a shift in my breathing. Part of me had already leaned away. My partner stopped mid-sentence. "Are you listening?" he asked. "Yes," I said quickly. Too quickly. He looked at me for a moment. Not accusing, just searching. Then he continued. But something had changed. His voice was more careful. He didn't want to demand too much space from me. That scared me. Later that night, after he went to bed, I checked my phone. It was him. A simple message about a family issue we both knew was sensitive. I didn't know who else to talk to about this. I felt that familiar pull again. The sense of being chosen, of being trusted. I answered without hesitation, and in that moment, I knew something important. I was giving my best attention when my partner wasn't in the room. The next day, my partner asked if everything was okay between us. Not angrily, not suspiciously, just honestly. I told him yes. That was the moment I crossed another line. Not because the answer was a lie, but because I knew it was incomplete, and I chose it anyway. At a family lunch that weekend, my partner was quieter than usual. He laughed when expected, participated when needed, but he wasn't fully there. I recognized that distance because I was creating it. At one point, he excused himself to take a call. While he was gone, he leaned over and quietly asked me if I was okay. I said yes. Again. Later, on the drive home, my partner said something that made my chest tighten. "I feel like I'm not the first person you go to anymore." I didn't respond right away. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to explain. I wanted to minimize it. But instead, I stayed silent. And that silence said more than any defense I could have offered. That night, lying next to him, I realized something that hurt more than guilt. I wasn't afraid of losing him because of what I was doing. I was afraid of having to stop. Do you think the silence was already an answer? After that car ride, the house felt different. Nothing had changed physically. Same rooms, same routines, same shared space. But the air between us felt heavier. Like we were both being careful not to touch something fragile. My partner didn't bring it up again right away, and I didn't either. We moved around each other politely, quietly, like two people waiting for the other to speak first. That silence gave me space to pretend things might settle on their own. They didn't. I started noticing how often I checked my phone when my partner wasn't around. How quickly I responded. How natural it felt to update someone else about my thoughts before I even understood them myself. One afternoon, something happened that normally would have sent me straight to my partner. A stressful family issue, the kind that usually turns into a long conversation at the kitchen table. Instead, I messaged him. By the time my partner got home, I had already talked it through. I had already been reassured. I had already calmed down. So when my partner asked how my day was, I gave him the short version. The conclusion, not the process. He noticed. "You seem already over it," he said. "I guess," I replied. "I dealt with it." He nodded, but I saw the disappointment flicker across his face. Not because he wanted drama, but because he wanted to be part of it. That night, my partner finally said what he'd been holding back. "I don't think you're cheating," he said carefully, "but I do think you're somewhere else." I felt defensive immediately. "There's nothing going on," I said. "I haven't touched anyone. I haven't done anything." He didn't argue with that. "I know," he said. "That's not what I mean." That scared me more than an accusation would have, because it meant he felt something I couldn't dismiss with facts. He asked me who I talked to when things got hard. Not angrily, just genuinely. I hesitated, and that hesitation changed the tone of the entire conversation. "I don't want to interrogate you," he said. "I just want to understand where I fit." I told him he was overthinking, that everyone needs different outlets, that talking to family wasn't the same as replacing a partner. Some of that was true, but not all of it. He listened, nodded, and said, "I don't want to compete for emotional space in my own relationship." That sentence stayed with me long after the conversation ended, because I knew I had already turned it into a competition, without telling either of them. That night, I lay awake realizing something painful. I wasn't confused anymore. I just didn't like what clarity would force me to do. Was I wrong for defending myself instead of listening to what he was really saying? The weekend came, and with it, a kind of quiet tension that made everything feel heavier than it should have. We were both home, moving around the same space, sharing meals, talking about practical things, groceries, schedules, plans that didn't go very far into the future. It felt like we were avoiding something without agreeing to avoid it. That Saturday afternoon, my partner suggested we go for a walk, just around the neighborhood, something we used to do without thinking. I said yes. We walked side by side, not touching, talking about neutral things. Halfway through, he slowed down and asked, "Do you feel like we're still on the same team?" The question caught me off guard. I wanted to answer quickly. I wanted to reassure him, but I realized I didn't know how to say yes without feeling dishonest. "I don't know," I said finally. He nodded, like he'd already prepared for that answer. When we got home, my phone buzzed. I saw the name before I saw the message. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Just seeing it was enough to pull me somewhere else emotionally. My partner noticed. "Is that him?" he asked. I didn't lie. "Yes," I said. He took a deep breath. "Can you not answer right now?" It wasn't a demand. It was a request, and that's what made it so hard. I looked at my phone, then at him, then back at my phone. "I can answer later," I said. He nodded, but his expression changed, like something inside him settled into place. Later that night, after we went to bed, I did answer, quietly, carefully, trying not to wake him. And as I typed, I felt the weight of what I was doing press down on me in a way it hadn't before, because this time, I couldn't tell myself it was accidental. I had been asked, clearly, to choose, and I had found a way to delay that choice without refusing it outright. The next morning, my partner didn't bring it up. He didn't need to. He said, calmly, "I think we're hurting each other by pretending this is still working." That was the first time separation entered the conversation. Not as a threat, but as a possibility. I didn't argue, because part of me knew he was right, and part of me knew that if I didn't stop prioritizing someone else emotionally, I would lose the right to call this relationship a partnership at all. Do you think answering that message was the moment everything became clear? After that morning, nothing exploded. And somehow, that made it worse. There were no raised voices, no accusations, just a calm that felt final, like we were both conserving energy for something we knew was coming. We went about the day separately. I cleaned the house. He ran errands. We checked in with each other about practical things, but not emotional ones. It felt like we were already practicing what distance would be like. That afternoon, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I want to be clear. I'm not angry." I nodded. "I just don't recognize my place anymore," he continued. "And I don't want to beg for it." That sentence hit harder than anything else he had said. I tried to explain myself again. Not defensively this time. More honestly. I told him I hadn't planned for this to happen, that it grew quietly, that I never thought of it as choosing someone else. He listened. Then he said, "That's the problem. You didn't think of it as a choice." He explained how it felt from his side, how he could sense when I had already processed something before coming to him, how my reactions felt delayed, how intimacy had started to feel one-sided. "I'm not asking if you love me," he said. "I'm asking if I'm still your first call." I didn't answer right away, because in that moment, I couldn't say yes without lying. The silence stretched between us, heavy and undeniable. He looked down at his hands and said quietly, "I don't want to compete with someone who isn't even here." That was the moment I felt the full weight of what I had done. Not because I had betrayed him physically, but because I had slowly removed him from a role he thought was secure. That night, we slept in the same bed, but far apart. There was no anger in the distance, just clarity settling in. Before falling asleep, he said something I wasn't prepared for. "I think loving each other isn't the issue anymore. It's choosing each other. And I knew then that love alone wasn't going to fix this." Do you think this was the moment the relationship truly ended? The next few days felt unreal. We were still living in the same house, still sharing space, but something fundamental had shifted. It felt like we were both standing on opposite sides of a decision that hadn't been spoken out loud yet. I stopped messaging him, not because I suddenly became strong or clear-headed, but because I couldn't ignore what it represented anymore. Every time I picked up my phone, I felt the weight of what it had cost me. The silence was uncomfortable, not freeing, not peaceful, just empty. One evening, my partner and I sat at the kitchen table again. No tension this time, just exhaustion. "I don't hate you," he said. "And I don't think you're a bad person." I nodded, my throat tight. "But I don't feel chosen anymore," he continued. "And I don't know how to rebuild something when that feeling is gone." I tried to explain how it happened, how it grew quietly, how I never meant for him to be replaced, how I didn't see the shift until it was already there. He listened, then said something that made everything painfully clear. "Intent doesn't change impact." That sentence landed harder than any accusation could have. He told me he didn't want to monitor my phone. He didn't want to ask for reassurance. He didn't want to feel like he had to compete for emotional space in his own relationship. "I want to be with someone who chooses me without thinking," he said, "not someone who has to remind themselves to." We sat there in silence after that, and for the first time, I realized that fixing this wouldn't be about cutting someone else off. It would be about admitting that I had already shifted away. That night, I packed a small bag, not because we fought, not because we hated each other, but because staying felt dishonest. As I closed the door behind me, I understood something that hurt more than guilt. I hadn't lost him because of one wrong act. I had lost him because of 1,000 small choices that all pointed in the same direction. Do you think leaving was the only honest option at that point? Living apart didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a pause I hadn't earned. I stayed with family, surrounded by familiar faces and routines that were supposed to feel comforting. Instead, everything felt slightly off, like I was watching my own life from a distance. People asked how we were doing. I gave neutral answers. "We're taking some space. We're figuring things out." I didn't trust myself to say more without breaking down. At night, the guilt was louder, not sharp, not dramatic, just constant. I kept replaying moments in my head, not the obvious ones, but the small ones. The times I chose to text instead of talk. The moments I felt relief in being understood by someone who wasn't my partner. The ease of it. I didn't message him. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. My partner and I spoke a few times during that week. Short conversations, practical ones, about bills, about logistics, about how long this space would last. Finally, he asked if we could meet and talk properly. When we sat down together, there was no tension left. Just honesty. "I don't think you did this to hurt me," he said. "But I also don't think I can unfeel what happened." I told him I understood. I told him I wasn't trying to defend myself anymore. I admitted that I had shifted emotionally before I admitted it out loud, that I had made choices that felt small but added up. He nodded. "I don't want to resent you," he said. "And I don't want to keep asking myself if I'm enough." That sentence hurt more than anything else, because I knew the answer didn't matter anymore. We talked about the future carefully, about what separating would look like, about doing it respectfully, about not turning this into something bitter. There were no tears, just a heavy sadness that felt earned. When we stood up to leave, he hugged me. Not the way you hug someone you're trying to keep, but the way you hug someone you're letting go of. And in that moment, I understood something painful but necessary. Sometimes, guilt isn't there to punish you. It's there to tell you that something meaningful has already ended. Do you think there was still another choice at this point? When we met for the last time, it wasn't to argue or revisit details. It was to decide how to end something with dignity. We sat across from each other, calm in a way that only comes after you've already accepted the truth. There was no list of mistakes. No need to prove who was right or wrong. He said, "I don't want to leave this angry. I want to leave this honest." I agreed. I told him I finally understood why I felt so guilty, even though I never touched anyone. I told him the guilt came from knowing I had slowly redirected my emotional loyalty, that I had shared parts of myself with someone else before offering them to him. He listened and nodded. I felt it. he said, long before I could explain it. We talked about what we had been to each other, about the good years, about the safety we once felt, and about how choosing someone emotionally doesn't always look dramatic. But it still changes everything. There was no blame in his voice, just clarity. We agreed to separate without dragging each other through more doubt, without trying to fix something that no longer had a stable foundation. Not because love was gone, but because trust had quietly shifted out of place. When we stood up to leave, he hugged me one last time. It wasn't cold. It wasn't distant. It was gentle, final, walking away hurt. But it also felt honest. I didn't lose him because I never touched someone else. I lost him because I stopped choosing him first, and that's something I'll carry with me into whatever comes next. Do you think I made the right choice in the end? If you enjoy real, thought-provoking Reddit-style stories, subscribe to the channel for more.